Hi, I'm Gillian, and I am a loom knitter who has gotten obsessed with color work. I started with scarves and then moved on to blankets and things like that, and every time I post a finished item, I get lots of questions about how I did it and what happens and how you do that, and a lot of people saying that, oh, they could never do that. And I think that's silly. I don't consider myself an advanced knitter at all. I just love color work, and I thought I would put together a tutorial and maybe show you how it's done. I'm not a professional at this by any stretch of the imagination. I do not doubt that there are things that I could do better. And I'm looking forward to learning more about it. For the tutorial, this is a project that I had started last fall and ended up frogging when I was like 80 lines into it because of some massive mistakes that I discovered, and I'm just now starting that back over, so I thought it would be a good presentation piece to kind of show you what's going on and some of the things that I've learned since I did this the first time and what I'm doing now. This is the art that I am starting with. It is the logo for the karate school that my daughter goes to. I took it and I ran it through this online program that gave me a graph that I then took and plugged into Photoshop and did some massive editing on in order to get something that I could actually use. I took the large graph and split it into smaller chunks just to make it easier to work with, just so you know what we're looking at as we go along. Here is my 38-inch knitting board set up as a rake with the widest or 3 centimeter spacer in between it. I'm using Bernat blanket yarn, makes nice fluffy blankets. I've done a basic stockinette cast on, and you can see that I have both a anchor yarn and then a dowel right up the middle. Now, one of the things that I've learned in doing a couple of blankets is for those first 3 or 4 rows, it is next to impossible to pull them down and get them tight on something this long with just the anchor yarn. But after you get to 12 or 14 rows, having the dowel in there is super awkward. So I start off with both, and then after I get about 10 rows in, pull the dowel out and leave the anchor yarn in place. You then finish your cast on right over the top of both the anchor yarn and the dowel. Again, this is just here to let you pull those first couple of rows tight so you get nice even stitches, and then the anchor yarn will stay in place going forward. I apologize for the roughness of this, but there's not really a good way to show it. Basically, what you have to do after you've got your cast on done and you're pulling your stitches tight, you need to kind of wiggle the board back and forth from in between, pushing down on the top and just kind of finessing it until you get those stitches tight and lined up the way that you want them. You know, you pull on the one end and then you go back under and pull on the other side and keep working them back and forth. Again, you only have to do this for the first 2 or 3 rows until your yarn has moved far enough down that you can actually get really a hold of it and pull the whole thing down and continue on. The questions that seem to come up in comments over and over and over again are, how do you read the graph and how do you change colors? So looking at my graph, it's telling me that I'm going to do 3 lines in the background color represented by the white squares, and then the purple squares are going to be my secondary color. I realized looking at the way that my numbers go, it's a little confusing. The bold lines are multiples of 5, and that box is actually immediately before the line. So if you're looking at it, then the little green arrow is actually pointing to the purple square, they're 47. I hope that helps. So according to my chart, right here on line 4, I'm going to add my contrasting color for the first time to peg number 47. I personally know of 2 ways to add color. The first technique that I'm going to show you works best if you are doing 3 or fewer, sometimes 4, in one color and then swapping back to the original, simply because if you go beyond those 3 or 4 pegs, you start to get some weird bunching and things and gauge issues. So we know from our chart that we are going to start on peg 47 and then wrap up through 49. So 47, 48, 49. So you find peg 47, and then you just make a simple knot around the stitch in between your two sides of your rake. That way, if you did just a slip knot and then slid it over the peg, you'd run the risk of possibly having it get snagged and pop off, or have the knot showing in your weave and looking a little funny. So this way it's in the middle, out of the way, nobody can see it. I always wrap towards the back first and then come forward, and there you go. Now you just bring your stockinette stitch in the main color right up to where you worked before. Tuck any tails in underneath so they're out of the way and they stay kind of neat. And then when you get to them, you just skip them and tug back to keep the tension of that line a little bit loose. And then you just knit all the way out to the end like normal. On your way back, you just repeat the process. Knit up towards it, cross over, and then pull it back to keep it loose so you don't get any funky bunching or anything going on, and continue all the way out to the end. To demonstrate the second technique, we're going to work line 5 of the graph, which has our main color through peg 45. 46 starts the contrasting color, and then we go back to the main color afterwards. At this point, you will need a second ball of that main color, whatever color you happen to be using. For this technique, we're going to knit in the main color all the way up to the point where we're going to switch colors. At that point, you stop, you take the entire ball of your secondary color, and you wrap it and twist it once around the main color yarn. This lets you change that yarn's direction, basically. As you can see, you can then pull the purple yarn backwards and then continue forward with the secondary color like it was exactly what you were supposed to do. Now, because this is at the first point that we've done this, we're going to tie in our second ball of purple yarn just like we did before, wrapping it around one of the stitches in the middle and knotting it in place so it doesn't get lost and you can't accidentally pull it out. And then do the same thing. We're going to twist that secondary color right around the new ball and continue on. And see how it lets you stretch it into opposite directions? And now your purple yarn is going exactly the way you want it to go, and you knit off to the end. Coming back, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to knit wide up to the color change, wrap that last peg that needs to be that color, and then twist one yarn around the other. That lets us reverse directions, and now we're able to pick up with the white right where we need to be. It needs to be after you wrap that peg. So you might have to slide it around a little bit to make it work quite right. And then wrap the pegs we need wrapped. And then that ball will wrap around, and we will continue on to the beginning of the loom so that we can knit over. This is just a close-up shot of what it should look like when you're done. So you can see how you kind of get a U shape where the yarn changes directions so that you can move on. Get used to juggling multiple balls of yarn while working on a project like this. At one point on the Tinkerbell blanket, I had 9 balls of yarn that I was untangling from each other constantly. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch my tutorial. I hope it helped answer some questions. If you have any more questions, please let me know and I'll see what I can do to help.